What would you do if the one person who knows your deepest secret walked on a live television and started talking? Not hinting, not teasing, but actually preparing to reveal the one chapter of your life you have spent years burying. Imagine watching your past surface in real time, unable to stop it, unable to breathe, unable to blink. That's exactly what happened to Melina Harcourt. The glamorous, polished socialite turned influencer turned royal adjacent personality who built her entire empire on the idea that she had nothing to hide. But this time, she was wrong. The broadcast wasn't supposed to be dramatic. That's what makes this moment so shocking. The producers promised a light conversation with freshly released ex-power broker Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman who once ruled the shadows of high society like a chess master. No one expected her to say anything controversial. After all, she was still technically under certain legal restrictions. And most importantly, she had never once spoken Melina's name publicly. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But that changed in less than 30 seconds. Because in the first half-minute of her interview, Ghislaine leaned forward, looked directly into the camera, and said the one sentence that froze every viewer, every producer, every publicist, and, most importantly, Melina herself. She said, "There's someone out there who has rewritten her past. And she knows exactly what happened in Soho, because she was with me that night." That sentence detonated like an explosion. Social media erupted instantly. Viewers clipped the moment and posted it everywhere. Reddit threads popped up, each one dissecting the phrase "that night," as if it held the key to a national mystery. TikTok creators started producing frame-by-frame analyses of Giselle's expression, zooming in on micro-smirks and brow twitches. People who had never even heard of either woman suddenly became invested, writing comments like, "What does this mean?" And "Someone better spill. This sounds huge." But the only person truly panicking, truly shaking, was Melina Harcourt. Melina wasn't home when the interview aired. She was sitting in the back of a chauffeured car leaving a private event, smiling politely as her assistant scrolled through emails. And then, in one notification bubble, Melina saw her own name trending. It wasn't unusual, she trended often. But this one felt different. The caption of the post showed her name paired with the name Ghislaine Maxwell, and Melina's face went pale. The assistant tapped the video. The line played, and Melina stopped breathing. You might think this reaction is dramatic, but that's because you don't know their history yet. Not the real one, not the version carefully edited for public consumption. Years ago, before Melina polished her image, before she curated every photo, before she married into the wealthy Harcourt dynasty, there was a different version of her. A version who desperately wanted to be someone. A version who surrounded herself with powerful strangers in hopes they would somehow pull her into their world. A version who attended strange, secretive gatherings in a part of Soho that nightlife blogs never talked about. The version Ghislaine Maxwell remembers. And Giselle? She wasn't just a background figure. She was one of the gatekeepers. The woman who decided who entered the inner sanctum of the elite and who stayed outside. The woman rumored to trade favors like currency. The woman whose downfall, years later, would expose connections that no one in the upper circles ever wanted revealed. So why speak now? Why Melina? And why on live TV? That is the question the world began asking, and the question Melina hoped would die out quickly. But Giselle didn't stop at one hint. She didn't stop at a single vague statement. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, calculated, and chillingly personal. Because the moment the host gently asked, "Are you talking about someone we know?" Giselle smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a warm smile, but a smile that said, "I am about to ruin someone's night." And she replied, "Everyone knows her now. Back then, she was different. Back then, she was desperate. I suppose we all were." If you listen closely to that clip, and thousands have, you can hear the audience gasping. It wasn't the kind of gasp you hear when a celebrity says something funny or unexpected. It was the kind of gasp that happens when someone walks too close to a cliff. Melina didn't even wait for the rest of the clip. She shut off her phone. She told the driver to speed up. She instructed her assistant not to say a word, not a single word. And for the first time in a long time, Melina felt what she had spent years running from. Fear. But here's the thing. Fear doesn't come from nothing. Fear doesn't appear out of thin air. Fear comes from one place, truth. And that's what the world realized as the interview continued. Because Ghislaine wasn't just talking vaguely. She wasn't hinting. She was threading a needle. Carefully, slowly, cruelly. She described a night in Soho where everything changed. She mentioned 3 people who were there, 2 of whom have since disappeared from public life. She referenced a choice someone made, a choice that cost another person everything. And although she never said Melina's name, she didn't need to. Every detail pointed in one direction. So the question becomes, what happened that night? Why has Melina spent years pretending she and Ghislaine barely knew each other? Why does she react with visible panic any time the subject of her early social days is mentioned? And why did Ghislaine choose this moment, this interview, this week, this year, to finally speak? Because make no mistake, the timing was not random. In fact, some believe the timing was chosen specifically to sabotage Melina at a critical moment, a moment the public knows nothing about yet. And once you understand what was happening behind the scenes in Melina's life, you will see exactly why Ghislaine waited, why she remained silent for years, why she chose this precise moment to finally open the door that Melina had locked shut. Let's talk about those behind-the-scenes pressures. First, Melina's marriage is under strain. The Harcourt family, known for its rigid expectations and perfectly crafted public image, has been whispering concerns for months. Publicists have been fired. Consultants have been hired. Rumors have circulated that Melina's personal brand is becoming unpredictable. The family cannot afford unpredictability. Second, Melina has been slowly building a new project, something bigger, riskier, and more image-dependent than anything she has done before. Something that requires investors, public trust, and flawless reputation management. If even a single skeleton from her past surfaces, the project collapses. Third, sources say Melina's inner circle has recently fractured. Old friends distanced themselves. A longtime manager abruptly quit. And one person, a person we will talk about later, warned Melina months ago that people from your past are resurfacing. But the real pressure point? The one Melina underestimated? Giselle's release from prison. Most people thought Ghislaine would disappear quietly. They assumed she would want a peaceful life. They assumed she had been humbled. They were wrong. Because Giselle's very first action as a free woman was to schedule that televised interview. And according to people who know her, she had a list, an actual handwritten list, of names she intended to mention. Melina's name was circled. Twice. So what exactly was the relationship between Melina and Ghislaine? Why was Ghislaine a presence in Melina's early years? Why did Melina abruptly sever contact? And why does she panic whenever someone brings up the Soho incident? To answer those questions, we must go back in time. Before the fame, before the followers, before the curated persona, all the way back to the nights when Melina walked into rooms she had no invitation to, wearing borrowed dresses, chasing a life she didn't yet understand. This is where the real story begins. In Soho. In shadowed clubs. In whispered conversations. In late-night deals. And in alliances built on secrets instead of trust. Because once you understand the night that tied Melina and Ghislaine together, you will understand why Melina reacted with such terror. You will understand why Ghislaine waited. You will understand why the world is watching now. But the most important part? The part no one saw coming? The truth is much darker and far more complicated than anyone realizes. The moment the cameras went live, no one in the studio expected what happened next. The host smiled politely, as hosts always do, tossing out small talk like a lifebuoy to keep the conversation afloat. Ghislaine Maxwell sat opposite him, poised, calm, almost deceptively serene. To the casual viewer, she looked like a woman content with life after hardship. A survivor, even. But those who knew her, even at a distance, knew better. Ghislaine never smiled without purpose, never spoke without intent. And the moment the first words left her lips, it was clear this interview wasn't about friendly reconciliation. It was a calculated strike. The host asked, "So, Ghislaine, you've been out for a few weeks now. How's life treating you?" Ghislaine tilted her head slightly, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Life is revealing," she said slowly, "especially when it comes to people who think the past doesn't exist anymore." The words were innocent enough on the surface. Yet in the industry, in the shadowed corridors of private clubs and elite parties, those words carried weight. Anyone who knew her knew exactly whom she was referring to. And that's when Melina Harcourt, seated miles away in her chauffeured SUV, saw the notification bubble pop on her phone. Trending. Ghislaine Maxwell mentions Soho Circle secrets. Melina's pulse quickened. She told herself it was probably nothing, a vague reference, the kind journalists always exaggerate. But deep down, she knew. She knew because there were things in her past no one could ever unsee, no one could ever forget. And Giselle was one of the few people who remembered all of them, in perfect, excruciating detail. Giselle continued, "It's funny, isn't it? How someone can spend years building a perfect life and believe no one remembers the nights that really mattered. Some nights change you forever. Some nights define you, whether you like it or not." Even without names, the implications hit hard. The internet exploded. Hashtags appeared. Hashtag Soho Secrets, hashtag Giselle Reveals, hashtag Melina Panic. Fans speculated wildly. Who was she talking about? What happened in Soho? Why were certain faces suddenly under scrutiny? Theories ran wild, as they always do when a figure of power is teased with hidden history. And Melina couldn't escape. She couldn't scroll past. She couldn't hide from the camera flashes of her past, which now felt like literal spotlights tracking her every move. She watched Giselle lean forward, voice calm but sharp, eyes locking onto the camera lens as if daring someone, anyone, to call her bluff. "You know, some people think influence is about who you know," Giselle said, her tone deceptively casual. "But influence? True influence is about what you know about people, and how much you can control without them even realizing it." Melina's stomach dropped. Her hands gripped the leather of her seat. She was no stranger to manipulation, no stranger to secrets, but the thought that someone who had once been her ally, someone who had orchestrated moments that defined her very rise, could now speak publicly, brought a sense of cold panic she hadn't felt in years. The host, sensing tension, tried to diffuse it with light humor. "Sounds like someone's been busy keeping score." Giselle's smile was slow, deliberate. "I've always kept score," she said. "It's just, sometimes, the scoreboard becomes public." And just like that, Melina knew the game was over. To understand why this moment was so devastating, we need to rewind. Because Giselle's words didn't just arrive out of nowhere. They were the culmination of a tangled history, a sequence of events that began long before Melina's rise to prominence. Before her meticulously curated image, before her brand deals and philanthropic endeavors, before she became a symbol of perfection, there was Melina as most people never saw her. Ambitious, vulnerable, and utterly desperate to belong to a world that was not naturally hers. Ghislaine Maxwell had been that world. She was one of the gatekeepers of the Soho Circle, a group of socialites, influencers, and underground power players whose private gatherings were whispered about in elite circles. Membership wasn't about wealth alone. It wasn't about fame. It was about knowing the right people, performing the right moves, and sometimes making choices you weren't proud of to stay in. And Melina wanted in desperately. She attended those gatherings in borrowed dresses, with carefully rehearsed smiles, hoping to impress people who barely noticed her. Giselle noticed. More than that, she evaluated. Every gesture, every word, every hesitation. To Giselle, nothing went unnoticed. And Melina? She was a fast learner, willing to bend, to adapt, to do what others wouldn't, until she realized she couldn't bend far enough without breaking. And that night in Soho, the night Giselle referenced on live television, changed everything. The precise details are complicated, shadowed by conflicting stories, and intentionally obscured by those who feared the consequences of exposure. But one thing is certain. Melina left that night with knowledge, scars, and connections that would define her career for years to come. When Giselle spoke on air about nights that define you, those watching with insider knowledge immediately understood the reference. This wasn't casual nostalgia. This was an announcement. And in the background, social media algorithms did what they do best: amplify panic. Clips of the interview circulated at lightning speed. Speculative videos dissected Giselle's expressions. Fans debated micro-expressions as though they were forensic evidence. Everyone wanted to know, who was she talking about? What exactly happened that night in Soho? And what would come next? Back in the car, Melina tried to focus. She told herself to stay calm. She instructed her assistant not to check social media again. She reminded herself, She was trained for crises. She had faced scandals before, minor ones, nothing this direct. But this was different. This was personal. And for the first time, in years, Melina felt entirely exposed. Meanwhile, in the studio, Giselle continued her interview. She wasn't finished. "You'd be surprised," she said, "how many people pretend the past doesn't exist. How many believe that reinvention erases accountability. But the truth? The past always finds a way to show up. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's explosive." The audience didn't need subtlety. They got the explosion. Comments poured in. Who does she mean? Melina Harcourt. What happened in Soho? The frenzy grew so fast. The producers had to scramble to cut to commercials before speculation turned into outright accusations. And that's when Melina realized the truth she'd been avoiding for years. Giselle wasn't hinting. Giselle was preparing to expose her. Publicly. Live. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. But why? Why would Giselle risk legal trouble to speak about Melina? Was it revenge? Was it a warning? Or was it something more calculated? A move designed to destabilize Melina at a critical moment in her life? These are the questions that viewers across the globe began asking themselves, and the questions that would haunt Melina for weeks to come. Because what came next in the interview, the next revelation, the next carefully chosen phrase, the next tiny smile from Giselle, would ensure that no one, including Melina, would ever see their past as safe again. And as the final camera pans captured Giselle's poised, composed figure, she delivered one last chilling statement before the segment cut to commercial. Some secrets were never meant to stay buried. And some people, well, they've built their lives on illusions. Those words lingered, echoed in living rooms, in offices, in hotel suites. They hung over Melina like a shadow she couldn't escape. And the public? They were just getting started. Before the cameras ever rolled, before Giselle Maddox became a figure of fascination and fear in elite circles, there was a history that no one knew, at least not publicly. To understand why the interview shocked Melina Harcourt so profoundly, you have to go back to the very beginning of their tangled relationship, the early days of ambition, strategy, and secrets in the Soho social scene. It all started in a loft tucked above a dimly lit jazz bar. The kind of place that doesn't advertise itself, that doesn't have a website, where the password to enter changes weekly, and where cameras were forbidden. This was the proving ground of the Soho Circle, a group so exclusive, its members were known to disappear from public view for weeks, resurfacing only when it suited them. And Giselle Maddox? She was the arbiter, the one everyone either feared or worshipped, depending on your perspective. Her reputation wasn't built on wealth alone. It was built on control. She knew every face, every story, every weakness. Giselle understood power in a way that made the rich, influential, and untouchable feel fragile. Melina Harcourt, at that time, was not the polished public figure the world now recognizes. She was ambitious, undeniably bright, and desperate. Desperate to belong. Desperate to be seen. She arrived at that loft one rainy evening, clutching a thin portfolio of photographs she hoped would impress someone, anyone, who could lift her out of obscurity. She had heard whispers about Giselle, about her influence and sway. Everyone wanted her approval. Everyone wanted an invitation. And Melina wanted it more than anything. The first meeting was brief, almost perfunctory. Giselle didn't smile. She didn't extend a hand. She simply observed. Head tilted slightly, fingers drumming against her glass. In that look, Melina felt exposed, evaluated, dissected. She realized immediately that Giselle wasn't just any socialite. She was a predator in the realm of high society, a master of influence who could make or break careers with a single whisper. And yet, she was also a teacher of sorts, showing you exactly what she valued and making you work for it. The next few months were a test. Melina attended every gathering she could gain entry to. Sometimes she begged her way in. Sometimes she slipped past security with carefully rehearsed charm. She observed everything. How Giselle spoke to the others, who received praise, who was subtly ignored. Melina noted every nuance, the tilt of a head, a laugh too sharp to be genuine, a glance that communicated more than words ever could. She learned quickly that in Giselle's world, nothing was accidental. Every gesture carried weight. Every comment was a calculated move on the chessboard of status. And Melina moved cautiously, like a student learning under a demanding teacher. She learned which alliances to form, whom to flatter, and, crucially, whom to avoid. But even as she adapted, she could sense the tension in every encounter. Giselle's approval was never guaranteed. One misstep could undo months of careful maneuvering. And the stakes weren't just social, they were psychological. The relationship between the two women was complex. On the surface, Giselle seemed like a mentor, guiding Melina, allowing her glimpses into the exclusive circle. But beneath that, there was always an undercurrent of competition, a subtle reminder that Giselle had the power to erase her from the narrative at any moment. Melina thrived in that tension, even as it terrified her. She learned the art of reading people, of anticipating moves, of playing her cards perfectly. But she also learned that Giselle's approval was fickle, and her attention could vanish in an instant, leaving you exposed. And then came the Soho incident. The night in question was one of those moments that defined the trajectory of a life. It wasn't a single event, not exactly. It was a series of subtle interactions, whispered conversations, and fleeting choices that collectively created a ripple with consequences that would echo for years. Melina had been invited to a private gathering. A small, exclusive dinner where only the most trusted members of the Soho circle were allowed. Giselle presided over the event with her usual elegance, calm, and authority, a presence so magnetic that every conversation seemed to orbit her. Melina remembers it vividly. The way the room smelled of polished wood and expensive perfumes. The way the soft music masked whispered negotiations happening in every corner. The way Giselle's eyes would flick to her periodically, assessing, questioning, measuring. That night, Melina made a choice. A small, seemingly innocuous decision that would later become the centerpiece of Giselle's subtle, public teasing. It's not important yet what that choice was, only that it existed, that it mattered, that it created a thread linking their past in a way that could never truly be severed. After that night, the dynamic between them shifted. Giselle didn't reject Melina, but she became distant, selective, and strategic. Melina was left to navigate the high-stakes world on her own, carrying the weight of that night as both a secret and a lesson. She adapted, evolved, and reinvented herself, carefully crafting the image of success and perfection that she now projects to the world. But Giselle never forgot. Giselle never forgave. And Giselle always knew the precise buttons to press to instill panic. Fast forward to the present. Giselle Maddox, now released from prison and appearing on live television, leverages that intimate knowledge. She knows exactly which memories will haunt Melina, which details will elicit a reaction, which phrases will spark social media frenzy. She speaks carefully, deliberately, and with purpose. Each word is a tool, each pause a weapon. And the world watches, captivated, unaware of the layers beneath her calm exterior. Melina, meanwhile, is left scrambling. Her team is in crisis mode. Her assistants are feverishly searching for social media coverage. PR consultants are drafting statements. But nothing can undo the impact of Giselle's poised delivery. Every viewer senses tension. Every comment thread becomes a playground of speculation, and Melina herself feels the shadows of her past closing in, unavoidable and relentless. This is why the history between Melina and Giselle matters. It explains the panic. It explains the strategy. It explains the seemingly disproportionate fear in response to a single interview. Giselle isn't just talking about a night in Soho. She's leveraging decades of intimate, intricate knowledge of Melina's ambitions, choices, and vulnerabilities. And that is the kind of power that can destroy lives. By the end of this chapter, one thing is clear. What happened in those shadowy Soho nights is not just history. It is a living, breathing force. It exists in whispers, in glances, in the tension between two women who have known each other longer than anyone else could imagine. And it is exactly what Giselle is now wielding on live television. But as the camera cuts to commercial and Melina's social media alerts continue to explode, there is one lingering question no one has yet asked. Why now? Why would Giselle choose this moment to speak, to hint, to threaten? And more importantly, what will Melina do next, if anything? To protect the carefully constructed life she has fought so hard to maintain? Some nights change everything. Some nights leave marks you cannot erase. No matter how many layers of makeup, PR spin, or social media carefully curated images you throw over them. For Melina Harcourt, that night happened in the shadows of Soho, in a club no one could Google, in a world that existed only behind velvet ropes and whispered passwords. It was a night she would never forget, even as she tried. For years, to bury it. It began with an invitation. Not a formal one, not an email or printed card, but a hand-delivered, folded note passed discreetly through a mutual acquaintance's fingers. The handwriting was deliberate, elegant, and slightly archaic. It read simply, Thursday night, 10 p.m., The Loft. Only those you trust, or wish you did. Melina stared at it for a long time, her pulse quickening. Invitations like these were rare, coveted. They were not extended lightly, and receiving one meant something, though she didn't yet know what. She knew the sender, Ghislaine Maxwell, and that knowledge carried both thrill and dread. By the time she arrived, the streets of Soho were alive with nightlife, but the loft was tucked behind an unassuming door, its location whispered rather than listed. She buzzed a secret code, and the door swung open. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, cigars, and tension. Candles flickered across the room, casting shadows on walls painted in deep reds and blacks. It was intimate, almost claustrophobic, but the energy was magnetic. Everyone in the room radiated power, wealth, or influence, and often all three at once. Giselle was already there, standing near the bar, observing. Her posture was relaxed, yet every inch of her screamed authority. She had the kind of presence that made people instinctively adjust their behavior. Melina approached cautiously, rehearsing the perfect introduction in her mind. "Hello, Giselle," she said softly. "Thank you for inviting me." Giselle glanced at her, head tilted slightly. Her eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to measure Melina's worth. "You're here," she said, almost as a statement, not a greeting. "That's all that matters tonight." Melina swallowed. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Maybe both. That was the nature of the Soho Circle. A world where nothing was exactly what it seemed. Alliances could shift in minutes, loyalties were temporary, and appearances were everything. The night unfolded in layers. There were whispered conversations in corners, handshakes that carried veiled threats, and laughs that hid more than they revealed. Drinks flowed freely, but the air was electric with caution. People said little, but the things left unsaid screamed. Everyone knew they were performing for each other, yet no one could resist the pull of being part of something bigger than themselves. At one point, Melina found herself seated near Giselle, a small table lit only by a single candle. Between them, the room hummed with murmurs and soft music, but the energy between the two women was tangible, almost tangible enough to slice through with a knife. "Do you know why you're here?" Giselle asked quietly. Melina hesitated. "To be seen," she offered. Giselle tilted her head. "To be tested," she corrected. "Everyone here is being tested, in one way or another. Some of us pass. Some fail. Most don't even realize it." Melina felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't yet understand what she had passed, or what she had failed, but she knew instinctively that every choice she made that night could ripple into consequences she wouldn't see for years. The key moment came in the middle of the evening. Giselle leaned slightly closer and whispered something so subtle, so perfectly calculated, that only Melina could hear it. She spoke of alliances that shift like shadows, and choices that cannot be undone. There was a weight to the words, a hidden meaning that made Melina's heart race. She nodded, pretending to understand, but inside she was scrambling, trying to process what exactly Giselle meant. That night, there were three other key figures in the room, their identities carefully obscured from the general public. They moved in tandem, like pieces on a chessboard, their influence unseen but palpable. Melina had never met two of them before, and one she knew only by reputation. Yet every interaction she had, every laugh, every glance, every word, felt like a test, a game, a negotiation for her very place in that circle. She left the club in the early hours, the cold air hitting her like a shock. She walked alone, replaying each moment, each word, each look. Something had shifted inside her. Something had been exposed, even if only to Giselle. And that shift would follow her for years, influencing choices, relationships, and the path she would take to build the public image the world now knows. What made that night truly mysterious wasn't just the interactions themselves, it was the aftershocks. Within days, Melina began noticing subtle changes. Former acquaintances avoided her, vague emails hinted at unfinished business, and strange messages appeared from anonymous sources referencing Thursday night, the loft. She didn't understand the full extent at the time, but Giselle had a way of leaving marks, small, invisible marks that would later become undeniable evidence of a shared past. Years later, when Giselle appeared on live television, she didn't need to provide names or specifics. Everyone who understood the Soho Circle could read between the lines. Every subtle pause, every carefully chosen word, every knowing glance was enough to send social media into a frenzy. The Thursday night in Soho became a legend almost overnight, the event everyone wanted to know about, but no one dared speak of openly. And now, as Melina watches the interview from miles away, she realizes something she had buried deep inside her for years. The night she tried so desperately to belong, to impress, to survive, it wasn't behind her. It was alive, and Giselle was holding it like a scalpel, ready to dissect the carefully constructed world Melina had built since then. The world may never know the full truth of that night. Who whispered what, who observed whom, and which decisions carried the most weight. But one fact remains undeniable. It created a chain of events that no one could have predicted and no one could escape. For Melina, it was the moment that defined everything. And for Giselle, it was the perfect leverage, waiting quietly for the moment it could be unleashed. And just like that, the seemingly innocuous Soho night becomes the cornerstone of a story that will unravel in real time, live on television, and across every platform imaginable. The tension isn't just about what happened then, it's about what comes next. Because Giselle knows, as does Melina now, that some secrets, once hinted at, cannot be contained. What happens next will test Melina's control, her alliances, and the very empire she has built. And the world, watching in real time, is about to witness a story that will define both women forever. But the most important question lingers. What secret did Giselle reveal that night? And why does it haunt Melina more than anything else? Before Giselle Maddox became the enigma that haunted Melina Harcourt's past, before she sat calmly on live television hinting at secrets only she could fully reveal, she was untouchable. For years, Giselle was the orchestrator of the Soho Circle, a puppeteer of influence who could elevate or destroy with a flick of her wrist, a glance, or a whispered rumor. She didn't rely on wealth alone. She relied on control, on fear, on secrets, and on the knowledge that everyone around her was, in some way, indebted to her. But even power, when wielded recklessly, is fragile. Giselle's fall was not sudden. It was a slow erosion of influence, a series of miscalculations and betrayals that accumulated like cracks in a dam. For a long time, she had believed herself untouchable. She had built her empire on loyalty and intimidation, but also on discretion. A guarantee that no one would speak out. The Soho Circle, after all, thrived on secrecy. If you revealed too much, you were exiled. If you revealed too little, you were irrelevant. Giselle's genius was balancing that line. Until she didn't. It started with overreach. Giselle had long been skilled at arranging opportunities for her inner circle. Parties that doubled as networking platforms, favors disguised as invitations, subtle pressure that nudged people to make choices that served her interests. But ambition can blind even the most calculating mind. In her desire to cement absolute control, Giselle began involving herself in matters she shouldn't have. Business deals that weren't hers to broker. Alliances that crossed dangerous lines. And one night, the wrong person noticed. That person? A former associate who had once owed Giselle everything. Someone who had once feared her, worshipped her, and perhaps even loved her in a way Giselle never reciprocated. But time, ambition, and resentment erode even the strongest bonds. That associate began documenting every interaction, every questionable maneuver, every secret exploited. The collection of evidence wasn't immediate. It took months, carefully built, until Giselle's armor was penetrable. And then came the arrests. One by one, key members of the Soho Circle began to vanish from public life. Headlines obscured the truth with vague mentions of legal issues and ongoing investigations. In reality, authorities had begun unraveling Ghislaine's network, exposing financial manipulation, undisclosed relationships, and coercive tactics that had gone unchallenged for years. Ghislaine herself faced charges that, while initially minor, expanded as more witnesses came forward. During her arrest, Ghislaine reportedly maintained the same calm, measured demeanor she had always shown. Observers said she never raised her voice, never displayed panic, and even smiled at reporters when asked for comment. To anyone else, this might have seemed like arrogance or denial. To those who understood her, it was strategy. Ghislaine understood that fear is as much about perception as reality. By appearing untouchable, she still commanded influence, even from a jail cell. But power has limits, and Ghislaine's empire had begun crumbling. Without her physical presence, the Soho Circle began to fracture. Members who had once deferred to her authority started making independent moves, forming new alliances, and distancing themselves from past loyalties. Friends became enemies. Lovers became informants. The network that had once seemed impenetrable now showed weaknesses. During this period, Melina Harcourt had quietly navigated the chaos. She had learned to play the game, adapting faster than most. While Ghislaine's influence waned, Melina's public profile rose. She cultivated relationships carefully, avoided the legal entanglements that had ensnared others, and created a brand that was seemingly untouchable. But no matter how far she rose, she carried one truth with her: Ghislaine never forgets. Even as Ghislaine faced prison, even as her public power diminished, her psychological influence remained. The memories of her control, the stories of her cunning, the fear she instilled, these lingered. And Ghislaine, aware of her continuing influence, began planning her return long before her release. Part of Ghislaine's strategy during her imprisonment was observation. Prison, she discovered, offered an unexpected vantage point. She could hear stories, watch human behavior under stress, and refine her understanding of leverage. It was during these years that she prepared for a calculated comeback. She studied the world outside, the Soho Circle, Melina's rise, the public's fascination with scandal, and formulated a plan to reclaim influence not through wealth or power, but through revelation. Her release, meticulously timed, was the first step in a broader strategy. Ghislaine understood that she could no longer control people directly, but she could control narratives. She could hint, suggest, and imply. And the world, conditioned by curiosity and obsession with scandal, would do the rest. The live interview was a perfect example. It wasn't about revealing every detail. It was about creating suspense, intrigue, and fear. Ghislaine didn't need to mention names explicitly. The subtext, the pauses, the subtle glances were enough to ignite speculation. Melina's reaction proved Ghislaine's point. Despite years of careful image management, despite public relations experts and brand consultants, the moment Ghislaine spoke, the past became immediate. Melina's life, which she believed was constructed on a foundation of control and perfection, was suddenly vulnerable. Every choice she had made, every careful calculation, every social maneuver that seemed so safe, was now subject to scrutiny. The fall of Ghislaine Maxwell is a cautionary tale for anyone who believes power is permanent. It shows that control, no matter how absolute, is always subject to external forces. But it also demonstrates a different truth. Influence doesn't vanish entirely with imprisonment or disgrace. Ghislaine's mastery of strategy, her understanding of human psychology, and her ability to manipulate narratives allowed her to remain a force, a shadow, a threat, a legend, even in her absence. And now, having returned to the world with freedom and opportunity, Ghislaine is turning that influence into action. Her live television appearance wasn't just a casual conversation. It was a deliberate strike, a reminder that her knowledge, her power, and her reach are far from diminished. And the target of that strike? The one person whose past she knows better than anyone, Melina Harcourt. But Ghislaine's fall from power also serves as a warning to the rest of the Soho Circle, and anyone who crosses her. It demonstrates that even the most untouchable figure can be brought down, but also that the same figure can rise again, stronger, more calculated, and more dangerous than ever. And for Melina, Understanding Giselle's past, her rise, her dominance, and her fall is crucial. It frames every interaction, every word, and every hidden threat. Because when Giselle speaks, even vaguely, it's not just gossip. It's leverage. It's strategy. It's a reminder that the past, no matter how carefully curated or hidden, never truly stays buried. Before Melina Harcourt became a figure feared and admired in equal measure, before she navigated the treacherous waters of elite social circles with calculated precision, she was simply ambitious, perhaps dangerously so. Her story isn't just about privilege or talent. It's about a hunger for recognition and a willingness to play a game most people wouldn't even know existed. To truly understand why Giselle Maddox's revelation struck her so profoundly, we need to trace back to the origins of that ambition. Melina grew up with an awareness of disparity. Her early life wasn't impoverished, but it wasn't privileged either. She learned early that appearances mattered, that perception often outweighed reality, and that the right people could unlock doors that talent alone could not. She watched others rise, effortlessly, it seemed, and vowed that she would achieve the same, no matter the cost. In high school, she excelled academically, but she also observed social dynamics with almost surgical precision. She learned to identify alliances, recognize power, and exploit opportunities. Friendships, for her, were transactional, but carefully managed to appear genuine. Every interaction was a rehearsal for the life she envisioned, one of influence, visibility, and control. By the time she entered college, her ambition had evolved into strategy. She pursued degrees and internships that positioned her for access to powerful networks. She attended galas, charity events, and networking dinners, always with a clear goal: to be seen by the right people, to be associated with influence, and to cultivate an aura of sophistication. Her charm was not accidental. It was practiced, honed, and deliberately deployed. Melina understood that in elite circles, perception often dictated reality. It was during this period that she first became aware of the Soho Circle. Stories of exclusive gatherings, secret meetings, and influential figures moving in hidden corridors reached her ears. To most, these tales were gossip. To Melina, they were a roadmap. She understood that to reach her goals, she needed entry into these closed worlds. And that meant finding Giselle Maddox. Melina's first attempts to infiltrate these circles were clumsy. Invitations were denied, subtle snubs were delivered, and she was reminded, repeatedly, that ambition alone was insufficient. Giselle's inner circle had a system, a way to test resolve, loyalty, and adaptability. One misstep could end a budding career before it began. But Melina was resilient. She observed, adapted, and returned stronger, learning from each rejection. Her breakthrough came through a combination of charm, persistence, and strategic alignment. She cultivated relationships with secondary members of the circle, those who could provide access without drawing Giselle's immediate scrutiny. She volunteered at events, assisted in organizing gatherings, and subtly demonstrated value. Slowly, she earned glimpses of the world she desired. Each small victory was intoxicating, reinforcing her belief that she belonged, if only she could navigate the final gatekeepers. By the time she attended her first true Soho Circle gathering, Melina had developed a persona tailored for success. Confident but approachable, ambitious but loyal, intriguing but cautious. She understood that every word spoken, every laugh, every gesture could be interpreted and measured. She entered the world of high-stakes social interaction with a calculated blend of charm and caution, ready to learn from Giselle while carefully guarding her own intentions. Yet ambition, even when disciplined, carries risks. Melina's desire to belong led her to moments of compromise, choices she later regretted, and alliances that were as dangerous as they were advantageous. The thrill of proximity to power often blurred the line between ethical decision-making and survival strategy. Each gathering, each interaction, each whispered conversation could serve as leverage, for her or against her. The night at the loft, the infamous Soho incident, was the culmination of these ambitions and compromises. It was not a single action, but the weight of years of careful maneuvering, observation, and risk-taking. Melina's early ambitions had brought her here, to a point where the past, The choices she thought were inconsequential could now be wielded against her with devastating effect. Even after she rose to public prominence, Melina never forgot those early lessons. She maintained an almost obsessive attention to detail, ensuring that her image remained impeccable, her alliances strategic, and her vulnerabilities hidden. She built a brand of sophistication, philanthropy, and influence. Yet beneath the surface, the lessons from Giselle and the Soho Circle continued to shape her decisions. The fear, the thrill, the calculated risk, it never truly disappeared. And now, with Giselle back in the public eye, hinting at the secrets of those early ambitions, Melina faces a confrontation with her past that she cannot avoid. The very strategies that once elevated her, her charm, her calculated risk-taking, her relentless ambition, are now being tested in real time, under the scrutiny of the world. The Soho Circle wasn't just a group of socialites, influencers, or celebrities. It was a microcosm of power. A hidden ecosystem where alliances shifted like sand, where influence could be bought, borrowed, or stolen, and where every smile and handshake carried a hidden agenda. To outsiders, it seemed glamorous, exciting, and even harmless. To those inside, it was a battlefield, and missteps could be lethal to reputation, relationships, or career. Understanding the power dynamics of Soho is essential to understanding the tension between Giselle Maddox and Melina Harcourt. In this world, hierarchy was never official. There were no titles, no visible signs of rank. Instead, power was earned through visibility, knowledge, and leverage. Those who knew the secrets, who understood the pasts of the influential players, held invisible keys. Giselle Maddox, of course, was a master of this unspoken system. She ruled through observation, subtle manipulation, and the promise of opportunity. A single invitation from Giselle could launch a career. A single slight could end it. She could make someone feel indispensable one moment and completely irrelevant the next. In this ecosystem, everyone was constantly performing, constantly calculating, and constantly evaluating. Every laugh, every compliment, every casual touch was loaded with meaning. Melina, ambitious and cautious, understood these rules early. She watched Giselle, learning how influence worked not through direct commands, but through suggestion, expectation, and fear. For instance, if Giselle complimented someone publicly, it wasn't always about praise. It could be a test. Could that person maintain composure under attention? Could they rise without arrogance? Could they keep secrets when the spotlight shifted? Similarly, a public slight wasn't always personal. It was a way to measure resilience, loyalty, and adaptability. The power dynamics weren't limited to interpersonal relationships. Money, opportunity, and social capital were also leveraged strategically. Access to events, introductions to influential figures, and insider information were currency. And those who controlled the currency, like Giselle, controlled the ecosystem. Yet the system was also precarious. Alliances were fragile because everyone understood the rules of leverage. One misstep could be exploited years later. Secrets were constantly gathered, stored, and weaponized. The same people who smiled and praised you could, at the right moment, destroy your reputation. This was the world Melina entered, hungry to rise but acutely aware of the stakes. Within this ecosystem, certain nights carried greater weight than others. Gatherings like the infamous Loft event were not just social opportunities, they were examinations. Attendees were evaluated for loyalty, discretion, and resourcefulness. Giselle observed the smallest gestures, the subtlest hesitations, and the quietest whispers. Every choice mattered. Every reaction was logged mentally and, in some cases, physically through photographs, notes, or recordings. Melina's early years in Soho were dominated by understanding these subtle power shifts. She learned who could be trusted, who was opportunistic, and who would betray her at the first hint of personal gain. She learned that strength was often disguised as compliance, and weakness could be masked by confidence. But the most crucial lesson? Everyone had leverage, including those she believed were allies. This understanding shaped her rise. She cultivated relationships with precision, forming alliances that served her interests while maintaining plausible deniability. She learned to give compliments strategically, to feign loyalty when necessary, and to withdraw quietly when threats emerged. Every interaction was a negotiation, a test of her ability to navigate an intricate web of influence. However, the Soho Circle's power dynamics also carried inherent danger. Ghislaine Maxwell, despite her fall from public power, never truly lost her understanding of these dynamics. Even behind bars, she had maintained surveillance of social media, of gossip networks, and of those who had once moved under her shadow. She knew Melina's rise, her public persona, and the subtle vulnerabilities that remained from that infamous night in Soho. Ghislaine understood that influence isn't just about presence. It's about timing, perception, and psychological leverage. When Ghislaine appeared on live television, she wasn't simply reminiscing. She was exploiting the very principles that defined the Soho Circle. Her comments, deliberate pauses, and insinuations were perfectly calibrated to destabilize Melina. Even without revealing specific details, she could trigger recognition, fear, and uncertainty. This is why Melina's reaction was so extreme. The power dynamics of Soho hadn't disappeared with Giselle's imprisonment. They were alive, and Giselle was now wielding them publicly. The audience, largely unaware of the intricate rules that governed this secret world, saw only tension, mystery, and scandal. But for those who understood, every glance, every phrase, and every reaction was loaded with history. Giselle's mastery of the ecosystem meant that even a single interview could ripple across decades of alliances, fears, and memories, exposing weaknesses in ways Melina could not immediately defend. And so, the question arises, how does one navigate a world where power is invisible, leverage is omnipresent, and the past is always a weapon? Melina had survived by understanding these dynamics, but Giselle's return, poised, deliberate, and observant, changes everything. What once served as guidance, as subtle lessons in social strategy, now threatens to become an instrument of public exposure. In the hidden world of Soho, no move is neutral. Every action, every relationship, every whispered word has consequences. And when Ghislaine Maxwell decides to wield her knowledge and understanding of these dynamics publicly, the fallout is inevitable. It is here, in the murky corridors of Soho's elite social circles, that Melina Harcourt's story intersects with one of the most notorious figures of modern history, Jeffrey Epstein. To many, the association would seem shocking, almost inconceivable. But in the web of power, influence, and ambition that characterized Melina's rise, connections like these were neither random nor impossible. Understanding this early connection is crucial to comprehending the scope of Ghislaine Maxwell's revelations and the fear that would later overwhelm Melina. The first encounter occurred at a private charity gala in Manhattan, an event that promised both visibility and access. Melina had been invited not because she was famous. She wasn't, not yet. But because her emerging social connections placed her in the orbit of those who mattered. The room was crowded with financiers, socialites, and cultural influencers. Every corner of the space thrummed with ambition, every conversation a potential opportunity or threat. Epstein, at that time, was already infamous in elite circles for his wealth, connections, and mysterious influence. He wasn't the public villain the world would later recognize. He was a figure of fascination, enigmatic yet charismatic, a man who operated with calculated subtlety. Those who moved in his circle understood the implicit rules. Proximity mattered, discretion was mandatory, and influence could shift in an instant. Melina remembers the encounter vividly. Epstein approached her with the ease of someone accustomed to attention, his smile practiced, his gaze assessing. He asked questions that seemed casual but carried deeper implications. Her ambitions, her contacts, her recent activities. There was a subtle energy in the conversation, a sense that he was measuring not only who she was but what she could provide, and, perhaps more importantly, what she could be leveraged for. It wasn't long before Melina recognized the patterns Giselle had warned her about. Epstein's attention was selective, and his approval carried weight. To be in his proximity was to be noticed, to have doors opened, and to have social currency increased exponentially. But with that attention came risk, the possibility of entanglement in situations that could damage reputation or, worse, personal safety. In the early days, Melina's relationship with Epstein was carefully professional. She attended events, exchanged pleasantries, and subtly cultivated visibility. Her goal was never reckless. It was strategic. She understood that proximity to power required navigation, observation, and sometimes compromise. Every smile, every laugh, every nod was measured, ensuring she remained within the bounds of decorum while maximizing her social capital. Yet, even within this controlled approach, tension existed. Epstein's social gatherings often included a mix of influential figures and ambiguous circumstances. The unspoken rules were clear. Discretion, charm, and flexibility were essential. A misstep could be catastrophic. Melina observed, adapted, and survived, skills honed over years in the Soho circle under Giselle's guidance. She learned which conversations to pursue, which to avoid, and which to steer subtly to her advantage. Ghislaine Maxwell, always aware of the dynamics around her protégés, had advised caution. She recognized the duality of opportunity and danger in associating with figures like Epstein. The key, she taught, was understanding leverage. How to maintain control over one's choices while maximizing access to power. Melina's early interactions reflected this strategy. She was careful, attentive, and observant, absorbing the environment, noting potential threats, and understanding the hierarchy at play. However, as the story would later unfold publicly, even carefully maintained boundaries could be destabilized. Giselle's knowledge of Melina's ambitions, combined with her mastery of psychological influence, meant that what happened during these early interactions could later be reframed, insinuated, and weaponized. The world would eventually see only fragments, teased by Giselle's strategic revelations, but each fragment carried weight. It's important to understand that the relationship between Melina and Epstein at this stage was neither criminal nor overtly scandalous. It was, however, fraught with complexity, power dynamics, and ethical ambiguity. Melina's ambition placed her in close proximity to influence, while her youth and strategic naivety made her vulnerable to manipulation, exactly the conditions that Giselle would later exploit on live television. The significance of this connection lies not merely in the interaction itself, but in its repercussions. The early exposure to Epstein's network, the subtle lessons in influence, and the awareness of power as both opportunity and threat laid the groundwork for the fear and tension that would resurface decades later. Giselle's insinuations during her televised interview weren't fabricated. They were rooted in a careful understanding of these early associations and the social vulnerabilities they created. By the time Melina rose to public prominence, her encounters with Epstein had long passed. Yet the shadows of those interactions lingered, quietly shaping her social instincts and strategic decisions. Giselle, always observant, recognized the psychological impact of these connections. She knew that hinting at them publicly, even without explicit accusations, would provoke intense fear, defensive behavior, and speculation. And she was correct. The moment the subject was broached, Melina's composed exterior cracked, revealing the anxiety that had been hidden beneath years of careful control. In the context of Soho's power dynamics, these early interactions demonstrate a key principle. Proximity to influence is both opportunity and vulnerability. Every alliance carries potential benefit and potential risk. Every association can be leveraged or weaponized. And those who understand this duality, like Ghislaine Maxwell, can exert influence years after the original events occurred. As this chapter closes, it becomes clear that Melina's early ambitions, combined with her exposure to powerful, enigmatic figures, set the stage for a complex web of leverage, fear, and social calculation. Giselle's insight into these dynamics, and her strategic use of them during her televised revelations, demonstrates why the past is never truly past in the world of high-stakes social influence. In the shadows of Soho, nights weren't just nights. They were tests, performances, and opportunities disguised as revelry. For Melina Harcourt, these evenings represented both ambition and peril, the line between visibility and vulnerability blurred by the intoxicating mix of power, influence, and risk. The infamous Soho nights were not merely parties. They were arenas where reputations were forged, alliances were tested, and secrets became currency. The Soho venues themselves were deliberately elusive, hidden behind unmarked doors, tucked into alleyways or inside discreet lofts. They were accessible only to those with the right introductions, whispered passwords, or invitations delivered by trusted intermediaries. These nights were cloaked in exclusivity, velvet curtains, low lighting, and rooms humming with tension rather than music. Every conversation carried weight, every gesture was observed, and every attendee's past was quietly under scrutiny. Melina's first exposure to these nights was a revelation. She had navigated elite circles before, attended galas, charity events, and cocktail parties. But Soho was different. Here, the rules were invisible but absolute. The powerful were present not just in body, but in observation, subtly measuring reactions, gauging ambition, and cataloging potential leverage. Ghislaine Maxwell, ever the orchestrator, operated like a conductor, orchestrating movement, whispering hints, and ensuring that everyone's performance served her purpose. The nights often began innocuously, with drinks and small talk. But beneath the veneer of glamour lay a careful choreography. Guests would exchange subtle signals, observe others' reactions to provocations, and navigate the delicate dance of social hierarchy. A compliment could carry hidden implications, a shared secret could be an unspoken threat, and a misstep could be cataloged for future leverage. For Melina, these evenings were both thrilling and terrifying, an opportunity to rise, but a test of composure and discretion. On one infamous night, which would later become a focal point in Giselle's televised revelations, Melina found herself seated at a small, dimly lit table with Giselle and a select group of guests. The conversation was casual at first, discussing art, philanthropy, and emerging talent. But soon, the discussion shifted to more personal territory: histories, past indiscretions, and connections. Giselle's method was subtle, almost imperceptible, guiding the conversation to expose vulnerabilities without